We got Kurtis joining us, and we're going to move the ball forward in the God, Guns, in America discussion that we're having. So we're going to hit chapter 3, which is where we have compliments, and we're going to hit chapter 5 and 6, I believe. Alrighty. What's going on?
What's up? How are you?
I got a Krieg Isle single malt Scotch,
Oh, nice.
12 year. I've had this forever. I got to drink them because they'll sit there for another 12 years.
Right? Yeah, I'm drinking let's see. I'm doing a nice
Flathead 660.
Tyrconnell. Oh, it's all backwards. Sorry, guys. It's Tyrconnell. It's just their
Okay.
standard single
Verdict?
malt. Quite nice. Quite nice.
Okay.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah. And then doing an Ave Maria. Reconquista.
Oh, nice. That looks nice.
Yeah.
I think I had one of those when I was with you last time.
Yeah, probably.
These Flathead 660s are really solid cigars.
You can never go wrong with that.
You'll never go wrong. Well, I did want to give Mike Austin some compliments this time because I've been railing on him
Right.
for a while now, and boy, I just looked like a redneck just then. He has this chapter, I think it's chapter 3, where he goes through arguments, bad arguments, and tries to show that they commit some kind of fallacy. And I think he attempts to be even-handed on this, because I think he believes that both sides, so to speak, deserve some level of embarrassment here. And he sets it up. He's in every case, he's sure to set it up where it illustrates a fallacy he's trying to get across or illustrate. And so I'll give you an example here. The chapter is called Guns, Lies, and Bad Arguments. I'm not a big fan of the title of the chapter. I don't think that lies is very helpful. I don't think that people lie necessarily. I just think that people are not very well educated. But hey, anyway.
Yeah, it's probably more accurate.
He gives different slogans. For example, number 3, page 38, the NRA is to blame. And it says a familiar refrain after a mass shooting is that the National Rifle Association is to blame. It has the blood of innocent people on its hands. After the Parkland shooting, celebrities like Chelsea Handler and public figures like Hillary Clinton laid at least some of the blame at the feet of the NRA. Critics blame the NRA for such deaths because it opposes any new restrictions on gun ownership and use, supports removing restrictions that are in place, and donates large sums of money to political candidates who then stick to the NRA party line. And then he analyzes the slogan and tries to show that there's an informal logical fallacy that is committed. And so that's an example of that. I think overall he does a very good job in his attempt in chapter 2. So I don't have a lot of, I don't have much else to say about chapter 2. I think that it's good to illustrate logical fallacies. They occur all the time, so there's no dearth of examples for that. This is Kettle One. I'm just tanking it.
Yeah, I like just filling up the big 32 ouncer and just pounding that back.
Yeah.
You know, the thing that's interesting that you pointed out that particular one, the NRA is to blame. Um,
Okay.
I feel like that whole section, what it misses,
Mm.
is personalism, or personal responsibility. Uh, I don't think that is something to just kind of brush aside, and he doesn't mention it at all. You know,
Hmm.
the the idea of holding a gun manufacturer responsible, for example, um, or an NRA, even the NRA responsible because somebody chose to do something that the NRA would clearly not endorse. Not that the NRA
Yeah.
is perfect, and I got issues with the NRA for sure. Um, but I don't know. It it would have been nice if he addressed personal responsibility in here too.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying. I
Well,
don't need to belabor the
yeah,
point.
I agree. I think this chapter, if I was to give a summary of my knee-jerk reaction to it, I would say that this chapter was a recycling of his Psychology Today stuff that he does.
Mm, okay. I
I
haven't
mean,
read much of that.
he's written stuff for Psychology Today on guns and bad arguments, and I think that he threw that in there so that he could try to lasso some philosophy instructors to use it in logic and critical thinking classes.
Okay.
When you're teaching logic and critical thinking, which have you taught that? I
I
forget.
I
Did
have.
you teach
Yep. Yep.
intro or okay?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a standard part of that course to go through informal logical fallacies,
Hmm.
um, and so that would be a curriculum for that section there. Um, I don't want to belabor that point because I have a specific way I do it. The first thing that I point out is that there's not a logical fallacy unless there's an argument.
Yeah.
So you're not going to see a fallacy with a slogan.
Right.
And at first glance, it looks like that's what he's doing is he's he has a slogan and then there's supposedly a fallacy with the slogan. Well, slogans don't commit fallacies. Arguments do. That's why I don't think that. Um,
And it seems, on that note, it seems a little presumptive to build an argument to support the the slogan, unless what your goal is, which is like what he sounds like he's trying to do, is to, hey, here's a bad argument for that slogan, um, but then here's a good argument for that slogan. You know, making arguments around the slogan to go
sure.
one way or another
Yeah,
is one thing.
the slogan is the conclusion.
Hmm.
I think that's what he's. I believe that's what he's saying. I don't think he's saying it's evidence. I think it's the slogan is a conclusion. So he examines what would be fallacious evidence for that conclusion.
And I've never taken your class, but I know you, and
I've never taken my class either.
I've never taken a class from Austin. I'm not sure how he teaches logic and that. But what I try to do is teach both sides of the argument. Um, I don't like to set up one side or the other and then argue, make an argument for one side or the other without also addressing the other side, because that's the point of learning logic and rhetoric and doing it well. Um, I mean, those are necessary exercises in my mind. So I wish I would have seen a little bit of more
Yeah.
that going on here, you know. Anyway,
Okay.
that's just me.
Well, you know, um, I think that's a fair point. I'm certainly not going to disagree with you. Um, what I try to do when I teach logic is I try to teach the kids how to think for themselves effectively, you know,
Exactly.
and that what I mean by that is um, I try to teach them what I would feel like is a decent encounter back to me. Like if I was arguing against them and they
Yeah.
were arguing against my position, what I would feel like would be the strongest footing that they could have. I want them to know what that would look like.
Yeah.
Um, Oftentimes, they don't know the strengths of the Republican side at all. They've never had a Republican professor. So that little bit in Austin's book might be the only little teeny bit of the Republican view that they ever get in college.
Yeah.
So in that case, I would say, and we've talked about this before, I would say that you have to think of the context of where you're teaching and what the context is. If the kids are just over inundated with Democrat propaganda, you might want to be a little bit more forceful on the Republican side because that's the only time they're going to see it. And they won't have a balanced view otherwise.
Right.
So that's my 2 cents.
I can afford that.
I really enjoy teaching logic though. I really got to the point where I enjoyed it. I enjoyed teaching critical thinking, logic, especially the informal fallacy stuff.
Hmm.
That's so helpful for people.
Yeah.
So helpful.
Well,
But really the whole thing, I mean, they need, people need to know what an argument is, I mean, hello, that's the first thing.
oddly enough, um, when I taught undergrad at Biola briefly, um, writing an argument was one of the most difficult things for an intro to philosophy class that I had.
Yeah.
Uh, Man, and I got pushback on, what do you mean that's not an argument? And
Who'd you
it's
have?
premise, conclusion. No, when I was teaching it. I mean, when I was
Oh, when
teaching
you
it.
were teaching it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's people like when you teach thinking, basically, it's what we're
Yeah.
doing. We're teaching how, the constructs of thinking. People think they don't need to understand how to think. They just think, well, I know how to think. We all do it. Yeah, but some of us do it well and some of us do it poorly. And when you don't learn the rules of the road,
Right.
just kind of like driving a car, you're all over the place and you're a
Yes.
danger to yourself and others.
I know.
So it's interesting.
I was listening to Dan Crenshaw today,
Mm.
podcast. He's got a
I,
good podcast.
I listened to him today too. I listened to an old one, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, I listened to the one on why housing is so expensive.
Ah,
Man, there's so many fallacy. There's so many bad things in public policy that happen. I mean, he's saying the left basically has a knee-jerk reaction. They have an emotion when they hear about something, and then that's their policy.
hmm,
They don't go beyond that. They don't think about it.
hmm,
The minimum wage is a perfect example. Rent control is another example. So they talked about rent control.
that's one of the things that drives it up.
Well, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
It's just mortgage, what is it? What was the policy that's going on recently with the virus?
Oh,
Mortgage,
oh, like the moratorium
uh,
on it.
yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
What a disaster. Eviction moratorium.
Yep.
Uh, what a
Absolute disaster.
stupid policy.
Well,
Anyway,
yeah, they got
we're
to do
getting away
something.
from the book now. We're
Yeah.
getting away from the.
No. Yeah, I could get sucked down to that vortex pretty quickly. That second one
Me
also.
too. Okay, so we already mentioned some stuff we already covered some parts of chapter 4, I believe, last time. Anything else on that before going to the next chapter? I mean, we're not doing we can't do a huge deep dive, but we talked last time about peace building
Mm-hmm.
and the gospel, and chapter 5 is a Bible and a gun.
That was that was an interesting chapter too. Um, I felt like I picked up on some. There was just something where I was going through. I was reading this, and I'm like, it's certain conclusions or certain exegesis, or I don't know. It to me, I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was just kind of off, and I was not that I not that I knew why, right? I was just I don't. I mean, he's got a good point about the tension, right? I mean, look, there is a tension.
Let's get some examples of what he talks about, like what
It,
passages.
oh, okay,
He's very selective.
and this is interesting too. I mean, I'm given a little bit of a generality here, and maybe you can take us more into specific. I have three specific sections that I pulled together in looking through this chapter 5.
Yeah,
But what I was trying to like in setting it up, my getting to those three specific sections, I like that he does talk about the tension, right? Because there is a tension here. There's always been a tension between pacifism and activism within Christianity. I mean, it goes back forever, right? I mean, and the classic medieval setup is the struggle. The perspective between the Dominicans and the Benedict and Benedict, right? Dominic and Benedict. Dominic was more of a I guess as a generalization, he was more of an active doing guy kind of guy. Um, and Benedict was more of a passive, let things happen and they're going to be that way kind of a guy. Um, and there's always been this tension in the church. Um, and the pieces, the three places that they weren't all in this chapter because one of them was, let me see, I wrote them down here. He scolds Peter for drawing the sword. He visits that one more than once. Um,
are you talking about page 102? The one who has no sword?
yes,
Luke 22:35 through 38?
that's where he addresses it in this chapter. He does mention it earlier, I believe, in an earlier chapter, but I couldn't remember. I didn't go back to figure out where those were. But you're right. That's on page 102 in this chapter. Um, so let me see. I'm sorry. Hang on a quick second.
Yeah.
So when I came across that, I thought, okay, he scolded Peter for drawing a sword, but my take on it was not because he intended to disarm Peter, but rather because Jesus had a specific role to fulfill and could not allow Peter to direct events from the course to which Christ was being called in the moment. He couldn't have Peter interfering with what he was having go on in that moment, right? And he does address that later in the chapter. Uh, I should have done better to say he addresses it on this page or that page. I'm sorry, Lucas. I didn't do that.
Well, while you're looking through your stuff, let me fill in some specific details
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
so that people can get a sense of what the issue is here with that passage.
You bet.
The passage at issue is the arrest of Jesus. And here we are, Passion Week.
Very
That's
fitting.
tomorrow. Good Friday. That's tomorrow, right?
Very, very fitting.
That we celebrate that.
So this happened 2021 years ago tomorrow.
No, that's allegedly Jesus' birth.
Oh, okay.
Actually, Jesus was born about
You're right.
from between 4 to 6 BC.
You're,
So our dates are off a little bit, but
okay.
it occurred almost 2,100 years ago.
There we go. That's more accurate.
So, okay, you have 4 times that this is narrated in the Gospels, and he's pointing out that Luke and Matthew have different versions, and actually Matthew has the strangest version, from what I understand. There's a lot of strange things in Matthew. I don't really feel the same way about John. John is where we learn that it's Peter, and we also learn that it's his right ear, and it's the guy has a name, Malchus. Luke, well, in Matthew, this is what Austin points out. He says, and I'm on page 102 of Austin here.
Okay.
He says Jesus may not have railed against the presence of swords, comma, and he did not tell Peter to get rid of his sword in this passage. We covered that last time. I thought that deserved a little bit more because you would expect there to be some kind of sermon. I mean, look, okay, put it this way. If I brought a sword into church, do you think that the pastor would have a conversation with me?
Probably.
I mean, I would think. I mean, it's not like a little pistol where the pastor may not know that you have it on you,
Right.
right?
Walking in with a scabbard on your hip.
It was probably a short sword, not one of those. I mean, even the soldiers carried shorter swords, but it wasn't a dagger. A dagger you could hide. But we must not forget that in Matthew's narration of the same story, Jesus told him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword." That's Matthew 26:52. The lessons to be drawn from this passage are not as clear as many seem to think. Well, if you're going to do a detailed exegesis of Matthew, then okay, go for it. But that's not really what follows, I don't think. But then that's not really the point of the book either, I guess. But he says, what about Luke 22:35 through 38? Does it support the claim that Christians can own and use weapons for self-defense? Again, context is key. In this passage, prior to his arrest, Jesus tells his disciples to buy a sword if they don't have one. He said, "When I sent you out without a purse, bag, or sandals, did you lack anything?" They said, "No, not a thing." He said to them, "But now the one who has a purse must take it, and likewise a bag, and the one that has no sword must sell his cloak and buy one. For I tell you, this scripture must be fulfilled in me." And he was counted among the lawless. And indeed, what is written about me is being fulfilled. And they said, "Look, Lord, look, here are 2 swords." And he replied, "It is enough." So I'm not interested in doing a detailed exegetical work on that passage or any of these passages in the scriptures. I'm interested in looking a little bit at why in the world are we, what in the world are we trying to put on these passages? The first thing I would mention about the Matthew passage is it's just false what Jesus says if you take it literally, right? He says that you will die by the sword if you draw your sword. Peter did not die by the sword. He did draw a sword. He did cut the guy's ear off. Peter, as far as we know, died by crucifixion. He died the same way Jesus did, except for
upside
worse.
down. Yeah, upside down.
He died in the same way Jesus did, and Jesus did not draw a sword. So, I mean, this would be one of those slogans that would be in chapter 3. This would be, if you draw the sword, you die by the sword, or something like that. That's not true. There's probably a lot of people.
In light of the fact that he tore apart the slogan earlier, he's kind of, in a sense, making an argument from the slogan here.
Well, a pure pacifist would really heavily rely on that, and the Sermon on the Mount, which are both in Matthew. Matthew's got some interesting things in it, and I think that you have to deal with Matthew on Matthew's terms. Mm-hmm. One of my first masters is in New Testament, so I know I'm pretty. I spent 6 years in seminary. I know we could have a long discussion about this stuff, and I'm not sure I want to get into it. But I would just point out that I go back to the fact that Peter had the sword. Jesus would have noticed that long before he drew the sword. It seems to me like what Matthew is saying, and so whatever interpretation you have to make sense of this. It seems to me that what Matthew is saying is that he's not complaining that that Peter, apparently Matthew was there too, eyewitness, but apparently he wasn't complaining that Peter had a sword. He was complaining that Peter drew it out at the wrong time. And that goes to what you were saying earlier. And I think you can make sense of the Matthew passage along those lines somehow. There's another thing that we learn in John. There's 2 passages in John. One is in chapter 17. I believe it's, I don't remember. I think it's in chapter 17 where Jesus says that he was guarding the disciples. And in chapter 18, I believe, is the arrest. I think it's 18:6 or somewhere around there, 18:8 maybe, where Jesus heals Malchus's ear. And there, Jesus says to the soldiers, he says, leave them alone. You've come for me. I'm paraphrasing, but he says, leave them alone. In other words, he's protecting his disciples, which is interesting. Now, that, I think you can read that along with Matthew and get a sense that Jesus is protecting his disciples from premature arrest. And the fight that Peter started there, actually he didn't start it, but that he engaged in, was not one that he could win in that moment. Given the nature of what was about to take place, what had been foreordained from God's plan of salvation, that was not going to, Peter's meager attempt with his ordinarily effective weapon of self-defense was not going to cut it. No pun intended. And he most certainly would have died by the sword. Most certainly would have died had he continued. And Jesus, we learn from John, was protective of his disciples. He didn't want them to be caught up in this arrest. So I would say that when you read these things together, they can make sense together, I think. I don't think that the liberals, the so-called liberals in biblical scholarship, think you can't make sense of these passages.
Right.
Like, they're just, they're contradictory or whatever like that. I think you can make sense of them. But they certainly don't prove that self-defense is wrong or something like that. I mean, that's not really what's going on there.
Well, and that doesn't really fit with the rest, like with the big picture view of Scripture either.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
when I was reading this, interestingly, when I was reading this morning, let me see, it was in a cheer. Wait, it was keep. It was in the second section. I had just started that that second section. Oh, I see. I'm in the wrong spot. So I read that. Then violence worse than an unbeliever. Oh no, it was that section. The one who has the sword. Hmm. Now I'm missing it. Darn it all. Okay. I know my point. I was just trying to reference the spot.
Mm-hmm.
Violence, guns, and the. Thanks for being patient. Sorry.
No problem.
Oh, you know what? I'm jumping ahead actually where I was
Okay.
because I draw on this that he talks about in that section, but I actually got going on drawing the three different places in Scripture together that give a broader, give the explanation, make sense of this happening, but in putting it in the broader sense context of Scripture. It was and I started getting going on that on page 109 in the next chapter. Would Christ carry a gun? I found that little section entertaining. So I'll wait till we get into the next chapter.
Okay.
So I'll just suffice it to say, it also what you're explaining makes more sense when you take Scripture as a whole. It seems to be incongruent to suggest that with Scripture as a whole to suggest that Christ is disarming all Christians when he says, Peter, put away the sword.
Yeah. Well, and he's certainly not advocating a Roman law that disarms people,
Right.
which is what Austin is doing. But Austin is using his book to do exactly that.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus never did that. Never even came close.
Yeah, he didn't really interact with the law.
What's that?
Jesus didn't really interact with the Roman law. Like it seems to
Jesus
be
didn't interact with what? Sorry.
with Roman law. Like you know, a lot of us are involved in politics today. Um, there's not a lot of scripture addressing how to be involved in politics and changing politics and using law here and there to um, advance the kingdom like we do today.
I think it's safe to say that Jesus never anywhere advocates um, di- criminalizing self-defense or criminalizing innocent conduct,
Hmm.
which is what Austin does.
Right.
Austin's entire book is geared around the goal of criminalizing innocent conduct. That's fundamentally in tension with the spirit and the text of the Bible, the entire Bible.
And I mean, I would say, of course, I think you're right, but I would say if I were to make a suggestion here to Austin, it would go back into the previous chapter. We talked about it I think the very first time around.
Yeah.
Um, getting a better handle on rights, and I think that's why Jesus didn't um, ever do that, because he had a good handle on rights. He
Yeah.
understood rights.
Well, there's two ways you can handle the Bible. You can do a deep dive into texts. You can do biblical theology. You can back off and do systematic theology, historical theology. Doing it all together, like my mentor Gordon Lewis did, integrating those philosophical, analytic, historical, um, and biblical theology, I think is the best way to go. But it's an enormous task. That's why his integrative theology is huge. You know,
Yeah.
it's bigger than I mean, it's a big book, and it's a huge task. And I don't fault Austin for engaging in biblical text at all. In fact, I think probably the more the better.
Hmm.
I mean, more discussion, not less.
Right.
So, um, but I would say in general, never lose sight of the big picture, which is that Jesus never, ever advocates criminalizing innocent conduct. In fact, I would say it's the opposite.
Hmm.
I would say he calls into question uh, the kind of rules that are selectively enforced, which is exactly what you have with gun control laws.
That's right.
Um, Anytime you over-regulate something, you're going to increase corruption, I think. Take, for example, the New York Rifle and Pistol Association case from last summer. It was a little bit disappointing. The what we didn't see in that case, we wanted to see just a big backhanded slap to the gun controllers in New York. But the over regulation of firearms in that case was just so onerous and ridiculous, so bad. You could just see it written all over the regulation that it was going to be selectively enforced, arbitrarily enforced, and an officer that didn't like a defendant or something could just entrap somebody. I mean, it would be so easy.
Mm.
Um, you see this. Let me just give you a little bit of a detail of what I mean by that. The regulatory issues in that case were the transportation laws regarding firearms in New York City. The the laws in New York City were that you first of all you had to have a permit to have a handgun in your home in New York City, which already strike one, not good. You had
It's
to go
crazy.
through this permitting process to even have a gun for self-defense. We don't have that in California. You don't have that in Los Angeles. Praise God.
We don't have that in Texas either.
Yeah, that's a shocker. Well, you can see a little bit of LA's Old West influence there because, I mean, people here would not stand for that. Um, but in New York City, it passed. And then the question was, okay, what can you do with that firearm outside of your home? Now, of course, getting a concealed carry permit is virtually impossible. You have to be somebody like Donald Trump or, Mick Jagger or somebody like that to get one. In other words, it's only the very rich and the very powerful, the well-connected,
The privileged.
that get it. And that's a may issue regime, and that's a problem. We have a may issue regime here in California. We have the same problem with concealed carry. But the regulations at issue in the New York rifle and pistol case last summer were dealing with transportation of your firearm, what was illegal and legal. And if you were taking your firearm to another property that you own, private property, that was illegal. You were a criminal, and you could lose your permit to even have the weapon for self-defense in your home.
Because you had it permitted at one property, but not to be at the other property.
Well, no. I mean, you couldn't. The only places you could take your firearm were to 7 different gun ranges in the city, and only one of those was a public range. The other were private. And during the appellate process, that public range was closed, and I think it was in the Bronx.
Jeez.
So no matter whether you lived in Manhattan, Staten Island, Queens, Brooklyn, you could only go if you didn't want to pay the private membership, and maybe you couldn't even get the private membership at these other ranges. The only public place you could practice firearm safety was at a place that was closed. And you had to be going directly there and directly back. So the question was, what's directly mean? Can I stop to piss? Can I pee in a donut shop? Or will I be arrested and lose my Second Amendment rights?
What if I get in an accident and I've got my gun in the car on the side of the road?
Well, who is empowered by that regulatory scheme? It will be the arresting officer.
Right.
And that person's discretion, meaning that particular person becomes a street level bureaucrat and is making now a regulatory decision on the spot based on what? Based on how you look. I don't like the tie you wore. I don't like your haircut. It doesn't matter because it's not going to go in the report. I'm talking about what the real decision-making process is. That's not going in a report. There's enormous discretion, which means there's enormous room for abuse and discrimination.
I don't want to get us too far afield, but so you can stop me, or you can stop if or not answer if it is. But sure. This reminds me of, and I'm not super familiar with it, and so I'm hoping you will be. But it reminds me of something I read about the law with the gun register in California, where there's something written into the law that guns can be, I want to say, for a new gun to get on the roster, it has to
handgun.
Be able to, a handgun, yes. It has to be able to imprint on the cartridge or imprint on the slug or something like that at 2 different places upon firing the gun, so that I forget what they called it, like micro stamping, I think. But this technology doesn't yet exist. And so because it doesn't exist, no guns are getting on the roster. Something like that?
That's a totally different issue. So let me complete the New York rifle and pistol commentary. Hold on a second. Because that's about transportation.
Okay.
And criminalization of innocent conduct, which Austin is totally for in the name of Christianity. I cannot imagine Jesus saying, yeah, I agree with a Roman law that you can't take your sword from one house to the other. I just can't even imagine that. Or you can only take it directly there. I mean, can you imagine that? I mean, what does that even mean, directly there? What's a direct route? And
It just
thank
seems
God that
arbitrary
it
on its
is
face.
it's totally arbitrary. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And the fact that Austin seems to be unaware of that kind of regulatory scheme and has no comment about it. I mean, it went up to the United States Supreme Court, for God's sake, and it was during the time he was writing the book that it was under appellate review. Austin, brother, you have to do a better job at this, because I mean, that talking about how Jesus would react to something like that is much more helpful, I think. But um,
It's certainly cogent.
it's ridiculous. I mean, you're talking about, imagine like a centurion or a Roman soldier not able to have a bow and arrow and other weapons like a sword, personal protection weapon at home, which is what the DC law was under review in DC versus Heller. I can't imagine Jesus coming out for that regulation. I mean, maybe I just have a fundamentally different view of Jesus than Austin does. But anyway, that I always like to take what we're dealing with on the ground here and extrapolate back to the Bible as best I can in terms of um, the hedges that we are producing. We're producing hedges around the law of murder, just like the Pharisees. I mean, the Pharisees wanted all these hedges around these laws so that you'd have other laws and other laws and other laws you could run into. And they would argue back and forth about, you know, what you would do and what would the law be and stuff like that.
You know,
But I don't see Jesus doing that. I see Jesus calling out hypocrisy and selective enforcement and arbitrary rulemaking. That's what I see Jesus doing. I don't see Austin doing that. I don't see any of that. I don't see him calling out any arbitrary rulemaking in his book. In the book God, Guns, in America.
yeah.
It's like, well, wait, isn't that kind of like the whole point of what we're dealing with right now in New York City? Give me a break. Anyway, what are you going to say?
I was going to say, interestingly, I mean, directly to your point, in the next chapter, he makes a comment in here, and he says, too often, this is on page 109. Too often, the Jesus worshipped is the Jesus projected from the worshiper. Um, you know, it's
What page are you on?
109. It's
How do
like
you
the
spell that?
I'm not good at spelling, dude. Um, but yeah,
I-O-9.
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay, I've been there.
Um, it's in that section. What would Christ carry a gun? I think it's the second sentence. He says, too often the Jesus worshipped is the Jesus projected from the worshiper. It is no surprise that the so-called conservative Jesus differs radically from the so-called liberal Jesus, which is, I think, hello, yeah, you're absolutely you're dead on. And then he says the actual character of Christ matters. And I completely agree
Yeah.
with him on that point. But I think that he then uh, uh, puts forth a liberal Jesus, like you're saying. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, what's the Democrat Jesus? The Democrat Jesus is fine with arbitrary rulemaking and enforcement.
hmm Yeah. And to your point, I don't think Jesus is necessarily taking sides other than like his actual character is. Let's not be arbitrary. Let's be
Yeah.
yeah, let's be truthful about it. If you're carrying a gun and you're not doing anything wrong with it, there shouldn't be anything penalizing about that.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
that that seems in
He.
line with the character of Jesus.
Yeah.
That's not a partisan. That shouldn't
I
be a
never.
partisan thought.
I never get the impression that Jesus is for lawlessness,
Right.
and Republicans aren't either. He's against arbitrary lawfulness and capricious lawfulness, which is not really lawfulness at all. I mean, it just becomes just arbitrary and capricious, which is the opposite of law.
Which is what he went head to head with the Pharisees about
Yes,
all through the
exactly.
New Testament,
Absolutely.
as you've been saying. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually more relevant to the gun debate now than these passages that happen to mention a sword or whatever.
Yes. Because they get at the heart of things and they get at the
Yes,
character of what's happening.
that's right. Yeah, that's right. You nailed it.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I totally agree with you on that. Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where you to get to the root of what we're dealing with now on the ground, it might be better to actually discuss passages that don't mention any weapons at all, that mention just what lawfulness means.
Let me open this.
Let me,
Okay, go
uh,
ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, I know we're not going to talk about this chapter today, but in the last chapter, More Than Hopes and Prayers, More Than Thoughts and Prayers, I think it is. I think it's chapter 7 in his book. He advocates for a 10-round magazine limit. That is totally arbitrary. I mean, even on his own view, that's arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
Because his own view, he's trying to reduce mass shootings, right?
Right.
So-called mass shootings. Well, what's a mass shooting? It's, and
Oh,
I'm
I think
being as
it's three
charitable as
people.
possible.
It's 3 people or more that die in one location, right? Isn't that the definition? Something like that?
No, no, it's not. It's not 3, and it's not dying.
Oh, okay.
To have a mass shooting, they only have to be shot. And it's 4, it's not
Oh, it's
3.
4. Okay.
So I don't know. The best I can do with that is that the best I can do with that is that it's got to be more than a couple, and it's got to be more than a few, and a few is 3, so 4. So the lowest level of several, basically, which is 4, have to be shot in a mass in a public random way, basically, I guess. I don't know if random has to do with it, anything, but it a public way, and not drug related and not gang related.
Oh,
Those are excluded
that's important.
because otherwise, I mean, the numbers would be skewed toward places like that have the highest gun control laws.
Then it would be racist, right?
Yeah. Well, um, an ordinary revolver has 6 rounds. So without reloading, anybody with an ordinary revolver could commit a mass shooting. But he's not arguing yet, by the way, and that's the problem with the arbitrariness of it, because it's like you wonder what's happening next.
Right.
If you limit it to 10 rounds now, what about 9 rounds tomorrow? And then all my 10-round mags are illegal. That's exactly the situation that millions of people are in when they have 11-round mags. Like anybody that has a high power, Browning high power, which is it's a curio and relic gun. Those have been made for a long time. John Browning is the one that designed the 1911, which is patented in 1911. That's why it's called that. But the Browning high power comes standard with 13-round mags from the very beginning, decades ago. Now they're limited to 10 in California, so it's hard to get these mags for your Browning high power. and you have to cap them at a certain level, and you have to destroy the magazine to do that. It's just annoying and obnoxious, and if you can limit it to 10, why not 9 next year?
Well, yeah. What if, like, here's the other thing, kind of to that point. Let's just say that we did all the things that Austin suggests in the last chapter. We get it all. Just here's the Christmas list. It's all in place. Are the gun rights, or are the uh, gun control people going to be satisfied and they're done? Okay, cool. We got what we needed.
No,
We're done. No,
no,
it's going to be, here's another list of a dozen, and then we're going to
of
give them
course,
that. Here's another list of a dozen until they're gone.
of course, of
That's
course. Well, what they
progress.
would love is a place like it would be a situation like the UK,
Right, right.
or like China, because a lot of them are on the left, like China.
Hmm. Yeah.
A lot of them would like the same, religious laws like in China. But
Thankfully, Mike isn't, I don't think, that far.
no, but he's on that side,
Yeah.
and he doesn't mind if that side wins.
Or doesn't see how they're, how
But
doesn't understand the teleology of what's happening here is
sure.
going there, you know?
But you see what I mean by mass shooting? On his own view, it's arbitrary. 10 rounds is arbitrary. Mass shooting takes place with 4 rounds. 4. And so if you say that your goal is to reduce mass shootings, well, first of all, people can reload. Second of all, people can have more than one gun. You could do a mass shooting with a single shot gun if you're just fast, right?
Yeah. I could
It's
do a mass
easier
shooting with my
with
Glock.
it's easier with a high cap mag or a standard cap mag, but you can have more than one 10-round mag.
I could do a mass
So
I could do a mass
it's
shooting
like
with my Remington 22 bolt action.
sure. Hmm. Anyway, what are you gonna do? You're gonna say that my revolver is illegal now because it has 6 rounds? What are you gonna say? It can only have 5, and I have to get a new cylinder for my revolver? Um, what next? It can only have 3 rounds because you want to prevent mass shootings. So before, without reloading, so I have 3, and I can see the rhetoric. I mean, it's why do you need? Why do you need? It's always why do you need? Why do you need? Why do you need?
Yeah.
Why do you need 4 rounds? A cylinder with 3 rounds, that's fine. And then now my revolver is illegal. In other words, I'm a criminal if I have a revolver.
Hmm.
There's no rational basis for distinguishing his view from that view.
Hmm.
That's the problem. And he doesn't seem to be aware of it at all. Which, when you're on the train of arbitrary and capricious regulation is fine, well then you're arbitrarily and capriciously unaware of how evil it is, typically. That's what I've seen.
I'm 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 remembering some sort of fallacy called a slippery slope. But maybe that's not all that important.
I'm not even making a slippery slope argument. Although, I should say, slippery slope arguments are not fallacious by design. It's only a slippery slope argument that commits the fallacy of slippery slope fallacy that's fallacious. We make slippery slope arguments all the time because we can see things and we can predict things, and perfectly fine to predict things when it's likely to occur. But I'm not even making a slippery slope argument. I'm making an argument that his position is arbitrary and capricious on the magazine. And I mean, that's just one of them. I mean, like we could go over, we're not hitting chapter 7 today, right? That's his chapter 7. So, but that is the issue. And if it's just the very nature of arbitrary and capricious regulations where they are lawless. A law makes sense. It, it's not just based in prejudice or feeling or something like that that changes from moment to moment.
Or fear.
Or
scary.
Yeah. So my point is that you have to have some kind of limiting principle. And if your goal is just to reduce mass shootings or gun violence, you're eventually going to have a problem with guns that hold one bullet, because that's all it takes to commit suicide. And gun violence, 60% are suicides. So, I mean, at some point, the magazine capacity is not really an issue with suicide, because you're not going to shoot yourself 10 times.
That's right.
So anyway, I'm going really a lot on magazine capacity right now, but that's a live issue for us. It's before the Ninth Circuit and bank right now.
Yeah.
And I would rather him deal with those issues, but he doesn't. He doesn't even seem to be aware of them, and that's the problem.
Well,
as I see it.
I want to point out. This is a good place, I think. Let's let me kind of segue, put it that way. Again, on page 109, he makes this comment that Jesus, he references Shane Claiborne and Michael Martin. They argue that Jesus carried a cross, not a gun. And he says, he told us to love, Jesus told us to love our enemies, not them. And I thought that that's an interesting rhetoric, because what that sentence misses is the distinction between there's a distinction that's missed there, I guess. Jesus didn't tell us to go kill people, but he did tell us what did Jesus say about evil?
Right.
There's a distinction between a person that we value, that is conducting an agent, right? And the things that they do. Are they doing good things or evil things? Um, and so it, I don't know. I think it's a point that's worth discussing in his book, that he doesn't make the distinction between those two things. He wants us focused on, you know, we shouldn't be, he later on in that chapter, or in that paragraph, he talks about Falwell saying it's uh, let's see, he brings up how Falwell openly threatened Muslims. Now, I think Falwell may need some work too on making the distinction, possibly, but I think that the it's a hasty conclusion when he says that when he told Peter to put away the sword, that he was disarming every Christian, because I think that what he advocates with peacemaking and being, self-defense of yourself, self-defense or the defense of others, other innocents, and killing somebody, he really emphasizes it's got to be as a last resort. And I totally agree with him. I think that
That goes without saying.
yeah, that just
That's
seems
just the
common
law.
sense.
That's just the law. That's law.
Right,
It's not arbitrary. It's not capricious. It's law.
right.
It's always been the law.
And we shouldn't
Eh,
want to own a gun so that we can kill people. We want to own a gun so that we can stop evil from happening. Um,
Well, you want to be prepared for bad things. It's the same reason you do all sorts of things. It's the same reason you lock your door.
he
There's
makes
nothing
this.
wrong with that.
He
It's
says
the same reason you wear a seatbelt.
he says here, it's hard to imagine Jesus enrolling for the concealed weapons class at Liberty University or anywhere else, and it is even harder to imagine Jesus approving of the words of Falwell as he openly threatened Muslims. And my thought was, but it's not hard to imagine uh, that Jesus exhorted his disciples that Jesus would exhort his disciples to enroll uh, in a concealed carry course. He makes a point that Christ wouldn't carry a gun,
It
but
depends on
Christ
what
had a
you.
but Christ had a different role. I think
It,
that's
it's
worth
pretty.
noting.
It's pretty clear that Austin doesn't even know what happens in a concealed carry course.
Hmm.
It's pretty clear he's never even taken one. He doesn't. He's not looked at the curriculum. He's not talked to an instructor. You know,
That may be true.
it's
Yeah.
it's all about safety. I mean, it would be as ridiculous as saying, I can't imagine Jesus taking a hunter safety course. What do you think happens at a hunter safety course? Just knock it out for me. Just tell me what that is. Uh, Safety, talking about safety, talking about the laws, being knowledgeable about how to obey the law. You're saying that Jesus would be against that? Okay. Hmm. I mean, you might as well say I can't imagine Jesus taking a driver's safety course.
Right.
It's just weird. What do you think happens there? It's all about how to protect innocent people.
And how to do it safely.
Yeah.
Well,
What else is that? What else is it?
know your target. Know what's in front of it, to the side of it, what's behind it.
I can't imagine Jesus at an every town for gun safety meeting. I can't imagine that. Where he's just approving everything, rubber stamping everything.
Hmm.
But I happen to know that Mike Austin was involved with those people.
And I wrote this little comment in the margin here. I said it is possible to imagine Jesus approving of Falwell's words with this caveat. Had Falwell directed them specifically to the evil done by the Muslims, and rather than the Muslims itself,
Sure,
themselves, Jesus surely would endorse something like that. It
sure.
seems. I mean, it's not hard to imagine.
But I mean these counterfactuals of what Jesus would do are just very limited
Hmm.
in their clarity about how that's supposed to be guiding for us. I mean, is that supposed to? Which chapter are you in now? Are you in?
No, it's the
You're
same
in
section.
chapter. Okay.
That's oh
Yeah.
yeah, I did skip into chapter 6.
Yeah. Okay. I think we probably should let people know we're in
Sorry.
chapter 6. No, because we're talking about the gun culture now, right?
Yeah.
What God would think about gun culture.
Or would Christ carry a gun? That section is in chapter 6.
Well, I think a better question would be if Jesus met Alexis de Tocqueville
Hmm.
and they were talking about civil society and the value of civil society and voluntary organizations where people get together and they form healthy communities around hobbies.
Hmm.
That's much more interesting to me
Absolutely.
because the overregulation is geared toward crushing civil society. And that's not just with guns, it's with anything. It's with anything that is regulated, heavily regulated.
An interesting bit of history there. After I think it was World War II. It might have been World War One, but I think it was World War II. After World War II, um, there was a lot of these organizations that built community, that people
Yeah,
gathered around and did community. They
sure.
really advocated. Uh, there was a big push advocating personalism and the idea of personal responsibility.
Can you define personalism?
Oh, I was afraid you'd ask me that.
If you can, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think of like Bernard Lonergan, and I mean,
Let me.
I taught at a Jesuit school for a long time, and I think of what's that guy's name? The guy that's at Steubenville University, Ohio.
I don't know.
He's a Catholic philosopher. I mean,
Um,
he's not there now, but uh, I forget his name. But Alex Plato would know who I was talking about. Alex Plato wasn't known for a while.
uh, Husak writes some stuff. Uh,
But you don't have to, don't feel put on the spot about that.
okay, I can. I think I can
But
try to give some highlights. Personalism rejects individualistic accounts of human life. Um, it,
what's
it,
the
it
source on this?
oh, this is a great book. It's backwards. It's ending over criminalization and
Is that the
mass
word he uses?
incarceration, um, by Anthony
Is that the
Bradley
word that is that the word that he uses?
in here.
Personalism? Is that the word he
Personalism.
uses?
Bradley goes through a brief account of personalism in the introduction to that book.
Can you
Um,
give a page number?
uh, yeah, here. Let me see where it starts talking about personalism.
Is that Cambridge University Press?
It is.
Okay, I know the book.
It,
It's a good
it's
book.
yeah, I think it is an excellent book. It starts on page 6 in that book, um, and he espouses the views of Rourke. Um, oh, here it is, right here. Rourke and Chazaretta Rourke explained that immediately after World War One, so it was after World War One, personalism caught on as a movement intellectually led by philosopher Emmanuel uh, Monnier.
Okay.
Uh, Personalism arose to challenge the depersonalizations and dehumanization of war, and a social order that was becoming more and more urbanized, mechanized, and industrialized. So, and he goes on to talk about how there was that legislation was becoming more and more depersonalized,
Right.
and it was not putting people at the center of the laws. It was
Okay.
just going after regulation. And so, uh, yeah, so it's it gets
All right.
applied through a lot of things. So
Yeah,
we could
we
talk a
probably
lot
should.
about it.
Yeah, we probably should bookmark that for
We could
later.
do a whole piece on just personalism and what it is and how it
That's what we
applies.
should do. Yeah,
Yeah,
we
it's
should
worth it.
bookmark that. Um, going back to what Jesus would do and how what a helpful version of that would be. I mean, I don't think Jesus would advocate arbitrary
No.
lawmaking and rulemaking. I don't think so. And so if your legislative agenda is arbitrary and capricious, I wouldn't. I don't think that Jesus would be for that because it criminalizes innocent conduct, and that's the issue. The issue is,
It's putting the conduct at the center of what should be legislated rather than the person.
well, the conduct is legislated. You can't murder. That's conduct.
But I mean, how do I explain that? Um, go on with what you're saying, and I'll see if I can form my thought
Well,
more clearly.
in California, I mean, the assault weapons regulation here is so ridiculous. It's so arbitrary. I mean, as soon as they passed the assault weapon ban, there were immediate workarounds of the law because it was arbitrary.
Right.
It was easy for industry to get in there and create new products. And in fact, the current federal assault weapon regulation that's before the Congress right now um, was introduced by Feinstein, takes into account all of the workarounds that happened in California. So she's aware of how ridiculous and arbitrary it is.
Yeah.
And it would be immediately struck. I mean, it goes against the Supreme Court holding in Heller and McDonald. Anyway, um, the issue of arbitrary and capricious regulation is far beyond firearms. It goes into environmental law. It goes into labor law. It goes into transportation law. It goes into military law. There's all sorts of administrative law that this is a huge part of administrative law.
Well,
And
it's a whole view of how to
yeah,
legislate. And
it's
interesting,
also illegal
you know,
under the Administrative Procedure Act. It's illegal.
good point.
Now, I mean, the thing is that the Supreme Court has issued guidance in the Chevron case and in our case, which I think is going to be dead here soon. But the Chevron case, which is during the Reagan administration, Supreme Court basically said that the lowest level of review is for these administrative agencies that issue regulations. There's a lot of deference. So, I mean, I don't expect Austin to get into the nuts and bolts of all that stuff, but that's where I'm at. That's my position, is that Jesus would not be for arbitrary and capricious rulemaking.
Well, and
But Democrats are for it,
in the
and some
section
Republicans.
on page 108, the section right before the "Would Christ carry a gun?" it says "An American Idol," and he talks
Mhm.
about guns being idolized by Americans and all this, and I was struck in there, um, uh, where this section could have just as easily been written titled "An American Idol" and written about legislation, because there,
Or about fatherless homes. I never idolized guns. I had a strong father. I
yeah,
didn't idolize my father either. I was not allowed to in my house. That was Now I had a shotgun at the end of my bed all through high school. I had knives. I was given a gun when I was in junior high. But I had a strong father. I was afraid of my father.
amen.
I and a
That's
lot of
good.
people don't have that in the home.
Yeah.
What would Jesus think about that? How about that?
My dad was good at showing me violence when I needed it.
We had gun safety in the home. I mean, even though I had access to guns and ammunition, because we had discipline in the home.
Right.
But that's a civil society issue. That had nothing to do with the fear of the law. It had to do with the fear of the, I guess what Aristotle would say in his Politics is the first political community, which is the home.
Hmm. That's right.
We have a movement against that now. In
Against the
fact, we
family.
have it. Yes, we have an entire political party that has said that marriage can happen without a father. Unbelievable. What I mean is marriage with children can happen without a father. Unbelievable. These are the deeper issues that we're getting into.
And really, it's these deeper issues that are going to
Yeah,
cut into
yeah,
preventing mass shootings.
yeah.
If you really want to prevent mass shootings,
And
let's,
father and poverty.
yes.
I was listening to a podcast today called Hardly Working,
Mm,
February 2020, and it was all about the success sequence, which is how to stay out of poverty.
mhm.
One of the first things is graduate from college. Sorry, graduate from high school. It's even more basic than that. And get married before you have children. And by the way, the word married means father, father in the home, especially for black kids. And it turns out it's like these black males are way behind
Mhm.
in our society. Black females and white females are roughly equal, but black males are way behind both of those because of the lack of fathers.
Mhm.
This is in the podcast today. And these are liberals. These were liberals talking.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it's amazing that we've defined a family to be now irrelevant, where males, men are irrelevant.
It's always
It's
been amazing
ridiculous.
to me that
It's
we talk
amazing.
about systemic racism, and we're not talking about uh, the federal policies, the government policies that are put in place, like welfare,
Yeah.
breaking up the families. That is where, if there's systemic racism, it's in those policies.
It's very common for Democrats to advocate a position and then it goes to shit, total as shit, and then they blame Republicans.
Right. No,
Very, very common.
it's not their fault.
I mean, there's a lot of things about gun culture that I bother me. I don't like. I think it's tacky when Colion Colion Noir. I don't even know how to say his name. He's driving his Ferrari and he's got his like AR pistol. I think it's tacky. I wouldn't make it illegal though. He has a right to do that, but I think it's it's it's. I wouldn't say it's cheesy. I would say it's tacky.
Mhm.
It's sad. To me, it's a little bit sad. It's obvious he doesn't have a family in mind. You know.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't want to beat up on him, but there's good parts of gun culture. There's bad parts, but I think that you need to have the freedom to allow the good parts to overtake the bad. And I think with freedom, you do have that. And I think the good can compete with the bad and win.
Mhm.
And that's what I would prefer. Just like in any other culture. I don't know, you know, I mean, there has to be a level of policing within the community that helps the community move forward in a healthy way. You see that with hunting, see it with fishing, camping. Um, but if you have the regulatory state come in and stamp out arbitrarily this or that, it's very hard for that to proceed in any kind of rational way or moral way. In England, I mean, what's the hunting culture like in England? I have no idea. I don't even know how to answer that question. What's the self-defense culture like in England? I have no idea. I think these people don't know how to defend themselves. I think they're afraid. So there's all these victims of knife crime, for example, in London, because there's a total culture against self-defense. And it's the regulatory state putting its thumb, it's the king
Hmm.
putting its thumb on the colonists. And they don't even realize they're colonists, which is the sad thing. It's actually Parliament now, not the king. But it's the same thing.
Yeah, you know, having read through his book now, I think the most helpful things, the most helpful part of the book here that that Austin is actually contributing to the conversation is
Mhm.
aside from getting us talking about it and being able to have some conversations with our followers, um, is the work that he does with the Bible, um, and basically challenging Christians to consider integrating their beliefs with the
Sure.
idea of owning a gun and how to use it properly.
Yeah.
And I think that that it that
I
helps
would
that
I
helps to
would
change the
welcome him.
culture. That helps to change
Yeah,
the culture in a positive way.
sure.
And that's
I
what we
would
need.
welcome him in our civil society and our discussions about what's good and bad. I would.
Of course. Yeah.
I think that's good. It's that last chapter where he brings the administrative state, the heavy thumb of the administrative state, putting its thumb on the scale in an arbitrary and capricious manner. That's where it drives me nuts. And it's like that's where I was like, okay, he's a Democrat. I don't even need to know anything else about him. I mean, I know he's
Right.
a Democrat at that point. Sad.
It's an idolatry of hedges.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. There's got to be some money to be made in some kind of like T-shirts,
We need
bumper stickers.
bulletproof hedges.
I think I'm getting the message from the boss
Oh,
that I kind of come in.
it's that time.
Yeah, it's getting that time.
It is a little late. All right. Well, this is a good discussion.
I thought so.
Yeah.
I always enjoy having fun with you, talking about these issues.
Likewise. It's always intellectually stimulating.
I'm not always called stimulating by a guy, but I'll take it.
Intellectually. Don't get crazy.
How's that cigar?
Beautiful.
Looks good.
Nice and
It's
dark.
got some good. It's got some smoke to it. Good smoke.
Oh yeah, it's got great
I've
smoke.
had to relight my flathead for several times.
You talk too much.
Probably probably just a sign that I talk too much. It's lit in one side. That's the issue. It's not that it's not lit.
Oh, I hate that. Like it's boating or something.
God bless cigars.
Amen. I'll drink to that.
Amen. How's your Irish whiskey?
Very smooth. This stuff
I've
isn't
got
is very sweet, which is good. I don't like the sweetness of some of the Irish whiskeys. This one's
yeah,
nice.
yeah.
How's yours?
I'm not a huge fan of Scotch,
Mm,
but I force myself to drink it every once in a while because I have it, and so like you know, just like I force myself to listen to records that I bought. But you know, it's pretty good. It's growing on me, put it that way. So I'm just impressed. I haven't seen any rats. I've seen one. I saw one cockroach that I had to deal with earlier, but that's it. So overall, pretty good day.
Good, good. So what are you doing for Good Friday tomorrow? Any plans?
Yeah, we're going down to San Diego,
Okay,
and we'll be there for a couple days.
cool.
We're going to celebrate the murder of the savior of the world tomorrow down there.
We're gonna get together with some people at church and do a Seder meal
Oh,
tomorrow
cool.
night. So that'll be
Awesome.
nice. Yeah,
That's awesome.
we have Good Friday service, or Maundy Thursday service was tonight.
Yeah, our church is still closed.
Mm,
Can you imagine that?
I'm sorry to hear that.
I set up the coffee over a year ago. It hasn't been used since then.
You might want to change those grounds before you run water over
I used them this morning.
Oh, okay.
I took them home and I used them. And they were a little bit nasty, to be honest with you. But I was like, I was drinking this bitter coffee. I was like, Jesus dealt with some worse stuff than this. So,
Well, I mean, not having churches gathering and communities, and
you're the one that taught me how to do all that stuff.
that's right. That's right.
It's just, I mean, I changed the paper, the brown paper,
Uh,
recently, and I thought about you. And it's very clean now, but there's nobody there. It's just really sad.
yeah.
I took a picture of the children's room, and on the board there were two notes by two little girls. One said, "Don't forget about me," and it was the pastor's daughter, and the other one just had a date and her name,
Oh,
the other pastor's daughter.
that hurts.
Yeah, and it was from last year.
I miss the community we had there.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. I wonder what the Lord is trying to show people. I don't know. I don't know if we're getting it. But anyway, you're missed in California.
Thank you, sir.
It's not the same. It's not the same at all.
Yeah, there's a part of me that will always be there. Man,
Yeah.
47 years there.
Wow.
Born and raised,
Wow,
and
wow, wow.
I as much as I miss the people, I don't miss so much, not being there. Other than you guys, the people, the church, my friends. Um,
Yeah.
but life must go on, and I've got 5 little ones to raise, and I can't see indoctrinating them in the system
Hmm.
there. Um,
Yeah.
and it's just great to see those little guys and gals growing up and in the outdoors. And Malachi and Shiloh are shooting the 22 bolt action that I got from my grandpa. That's kind of fun.
Praise God.
I took him to the range and let him shoot the Ruger takedown. And I had a 25 round clip in there. And Shiloh, I think she shot all 25 of those within a minute. and I and this old guy on the range, he came up to me and he goes, "Hey, can I share you a tip?" And I'm like, please, because I've never, this is my first time with kids and teaching them guns and all this stuff, and I'll take any tip I can get.
Yeah.
He goes, he goes, "Do you have a bolt action?" I said, "You know what? I
Well,
I do actually."
well, with 22, it's not too bad
No, but still,
financially, but yeah,
one at a
still.
time. And
Yeah.
hey, I can give you a
Right,
box and you
right,
can
right.
stay there for hours.
There you go. Yeah, yeah. That's not bad. That's not bad.
So it's
That's
good.
smart.
It's good.
I was going to say, don't tell Mike Austin you had a 25 rounder.
I found,
What would Jesus say?
the funny thing
It's not
is,
it's not 10. What would Jesus would only say 10.
I know. Well,
It's my JP impression. Jesus would only say 10.
what a country.
Idiot.
Yeah, so in an effort to
What
try
a
to be
country.
more Christ-like, I gave him a single bolt action.
That's awesome, man. That really is awesome.
I didn't realize this. My dad shared this with me, but similar to Mike, um, I found out that because my dad actually gave me the gun when I was young. I don't know. I know I was around 10, and um, he said, "Grandpa got this for you." And I was like, "What? Grandpa got this for me? This is great." So, I didn't know the backstory, but apparently my grandpa gave that to my mom at her baby shower for me.
Wow.
So like Mike,
That's cool.
I got a 22 bolt action, single bolt action, uh, Remington. I think it's a 514 or five something like that. Um,
Oh man, that's awesome.
uh,
And you have it?
when I was in the womb. Yeah,
And you
I,
still have it?
I do. I do.
Sweet.
Yeah, I just picked it up and brought it back at this trip when I
Praise
brought
God.
dad back. Yeah,
Amen.
so
All right,
cool.
buddy. I'm getting the sign.
All right, the sign. I don't want to mess with the sign. Um,
Yeah.
give my best to
All right, buddy.
administration
Don't say
there.
her name. Don't say
Give
her
to the
name.
administration there,
I
and
will.
we'll talk
Okay,
later.
buddy.
Okay,
See ya.
see you, man.